December 22nd, 1944. Bastogne, Belgium. Hour 14 of the siege. A single dog tag lay in the snow beside a burned-out half-track. Staff Sergeant Eugene Harmon pressed his fingers against a German corporal's neck. Faint pulse. The man had taken 2 bullets, one through the shoulder, one in the gut. Harmon had 9 pints of whole blood in his aid station. All Type O universal donor. 60 American wounded waited for treatment. 15 German prisoners lay in the same cellar, bleeding into the frozen dirt floor. The road out had been cut for 70 hours. No supplies coming. No ambulances leaving. Division orders were clear. Treat American casualties first. But the Geneva Convention said all wounded deserved care. Harmon had seen the German medics trying to help American wounded 2 days before, under fire, waving Red Cross flags. One German medic had died carrying a US paratrooper to cover. Now the choice sat in Harmon's hands. 9 pints, 75 total wounded. Who deserved to live? The clock ran against every one of them. Answer at minute 19. The dog tag in the snow belonged to Private Daniel Murphy, 20 years old. Brooklyn, New York. Murphy had been riding in the half-track when it took a direct hit from a German tank. The explosion threw him 30 feet. He died instantly. The half-track burned for 2 hours before the flames died down. Now it sat there, a blackened skeleton of metal. The dog tag must have fallen when medics carried Murphy's body away. Harmon picked it up. The metal was cold. He put it in his pocket. He would return it to Murphy's family someday, if he survived Bastogne. Harmon was 26 years old. He had been a medic for 2 years. He had seen combat in North Africa and Italy, but nothing compared to Bastogne. The Germans had surrounded the town 3 days ago. The 101st Airborne Division was trapped. Supplies were running out. Ammunition, food, medical materials. Every hour brought more wounded. The aid station was overwhelmed. Harmon worked in a cellar beneath a destroyed church. The building above had collapsed from artillery fire. Only the stone foundation remained. 75 wounded men lay on the dirt floor, some on stretchers, others on blankets. A few just on bare ground. The temperature was 8 degrees. There was no heat. The men shivered, some from cold, others from shock. The blood supply worried Harmon most. He had started the siege with 20 pints. He had used 11 already. 9 remained, all Type O. That meant anyone could receive it. Type O was called universal donor. It worked for all blood types. But 9 pints would not cover 75 wounded men. Harmon had to choose who got blood and who did not. The men who did not get blood would probably die. That was the reality. Medical triage in wartime was brutal. You saved who you could. You accepted who you could not. Division orders came down that morning. A lieutenant delivered them personally. Treat American casualties first. Preserve all resources for US forces. The German prisoners were low priority. Give them basic care if resources allowed, but Americans came first. Hold, the order made sense from a military perspective. You saved your own soldiers. They could return to the fight. Enemy prisoners were out of the war regardless. Better to invest resources in your own forces. Harmon understood the logic, but he struggled with the ethics. 2 days earlier, on December 20th, Harmon had witnessed something that changed his thinking. He was treating wounded near the southern perimeter. A firefight erupted. German infantry attacked an American position. The fighting was intense. Harmon and another medic, Corporal James Riley, took cover in a ditch. They watched the battle unfold. The Americans held their ground. The German attack stalled. Then Harmon saw something unexpected. A German soldier in a medical uniform appeared. He wore a Red Cross armband. He moved through the battlefield under fire. He was dragging a wounded American paratrooper. The paratrooper had been hit in both legs. He could not walk. The German medic was pulling him to safety. Harmon watched in disbelief. The German medic was risking his life to save an enemy soldier. Bullets kicked up snow around him. He kept moving. He pulled the paratrooper into a shell crater. Then he waved a Red Cross flag, the universal signal for medical personnel. The American soldiers saw the flag. They held their fire. The German medic began treating the paratrooper. Harmon could see him working from the ditch. The medic was applying bandages. He was trying to stop the bleeding. The paratrooper was alive because of this German soldier. Then a German machine gun opened fire. It was positioned on a hill. The gunner could not see the Red Cross flag from that angle. He saw movement in the crater. He fired. Bullets hit the German medic. He fell forward onto the American paratrooper. The paratrooper screamed. Harmon and Riley ran from the ditch. They reached the crater. The German medic was dead, 3 bullets in his back. His body had shielded the American paratrooper from more fire. The paratrooper was still alive. Riley helped Harmon carry the American back to safety. They left the German medic's body in the crater. There was no time to recover it. The fighting was still raging. That night, Harmon thought about what he had seen. The German medic had crossed the battlefield to save an American. He had given his life doing it. That action stayed with Harmon. It complicated his view of the enemy. The Germans were not all fanatics. Some were just soldiers doing their duty. Some were medical personnel trying to save lives. The German medic had honored his oath. He had treated a wounded soldier regardless of nationality. He had paid the ultimate price. Now, on December 22nd, Harmon faced his own choice. 15 German prisoners lay wounded in his aid station. Division orders said to deprioritize them, but the memory of that German medic haunted him. If that medic could cross a battlefield under fire to save an American, could Harmon not spare some blood to save Germans? The Geneva Convention was clear. All wounded deserved humane treatment. Prisoners of war had rights. Denying them medical care violated international law. But so did many things in war. Rules bent when survival was at stake. Harmon examined the German corporal. The man was in bad shape. 2 bullet wounds. 1 in the shoulder, 1 in the abdomen. The shoulder wound was serious but survivable. The gut wound was critical. Without blood and surgery, the man would die within hours. Harmon checked his pulse again. Still faint. The corporal was going into shock. His body was shutting down from blood loss. Harmon looked at his face. The man was young, maybe 25. He had blonde hair and blue eyes. His uniform was torn and dirty. His boots were falling apart. He looked like he had been marching for days. Corporal Riley approached. He was Harmon's assistant. Riley was from Tennessee. He was 22. He had been a medic for 1 year. Riley asked what Harmon was doing. Harmon said he was checking the German. Riley said the lieutenant's orders were clear. Americans first. Harmon said he knew the orders. Riley asked if Harmon was going to follow them. Harmon did not answer. He kept examining the German corporal. Riley stood there for a moment. Then he walked away. He did not push the issue. Riley trusted Harmon's judgment, but he was worried. Following orders kept you out of trouble. Disobeying orders got you court-martialed. Harmon walked through the cellar. He assessed each wounded man. The 60 Americans ranged from minor to critical. 10 were critical. They needed blood immediately. 20 were serious. They needed blood within hours. 30 were stable. They could wait. The 15 Germans had a similar distribution. 3 were critical. 6 were serious. 6 were stable. If Harmon followed orders, he would give all 9 pints to Americans. The 10 critical Americans would get blood, but that left nothing for the German prisoners. The 3 critical Germans would die. Maybe some of the serious cases too. If Harmon split the blood equally, he could give blood to both Americans and Germans, but then some critical Americans might not get enough. They might die because he divided resources. That was the dilemma. Save more enemy lives by risking American lives, or save American lives and let the enemy die. There was no good answer. Any choice meant people died. Harmon sat on an empty ammunition crate. He closed his eyes. He thought about the German medic who died saving the paratrooper. What would that medic have done in this situation? Harmon believed he knew the answer. The medic would have treated everyone. Nationality would not matter. Only the severity of the wound. Captain William Driscoll entered the cellar. He was the medical officer in charge. Driscoll was 33. He had served since 1942. He was a good officer, fair and competent. Driscoll walked over to Harmon. He asked about the blood situation. Harmon told him they had 9 pints left. Driscoll nodded. He said to use it on the critical American cases. Harmon asked what about the Germans. Driscoll said, follow the division orders. Harmon mentioned the Geneva Convention. Driscoll said the Geneva Convention did not account for limited resources in a surrounded town. They had to prioritize. Harmon said the German medic did not prioritize. Driscoll paused. He knew the story. Riley had told him. Driscoll said that medic died for his choice. Harmon said maybe, but he also saved a life. Driscoll said one life was not worth the medic's life. Harmon disagreed. He said every life was worth the risk. That was what medics did. The conversation went in circles. Driscoll finally said the decision was Harmon's. He was the senior medic on duty. But Driscoll warned him, if Americans died because blood went to Germans, Harmon would face consequences. The men would be angry. The officers would question his judgment. A court-martial was possible. Harmon said he understood. Driscoll left the cellar. He had other duties. The perimeter was under constant attack. Wounded were coming in from multiple positions. Driscoll needed to coordinate the medical response. He did not have time to argue with Harmon. Harmon made his rounds. He talked to the wounded men. He listened to their stories. One American private named Eddie Kowalski had strong opinions. Kowalski was from Pennsylvania. He was 24. He had a shrapnel wound in his thigh. Not life-threatening, but painful. Kowalski saw Harmon examining the Germans. He asked Harmon what he was doing. Harmon said he was assessing all the wounded. Kowalski said the Germans did not deserve assessment. They were the enemy. They had started this war. They had killed American soldiers. Let them die. Harmon asked if Kowalski had seen the German medic 2 days ago. Kowalski said yes. He had been there. He admitted the German medic was brave. But one brave German did not change anything. Germany was still the enemy. Harmon understood Kowalski's anger. Kowalski had lost friends in this battle. His unit had taken heavy casualties. He wanted revenge. Many soldiers felt the same way. But revenge and medical ethics were different things. Harmon tried to explain. He said medics served a higher purpose. They saved lives. That was the mission. Nationality did not change the mission. Kowalski said that was naive. This was war. You helped your side. You hurt the other side. That was how you won. Harmon said maybe, but winning meant nothing. If you lost your humanity in the process. Kowalski laughed bitterly. He said Harmon was a fool, but he said it without real malice. He was just frustrated with the cold, the hunger, the constant danger, the fear. At hour 16 of the siege, a German artillery barrage hit Bastogne. Shells rained down for 30 minutes. The aid station shook with each impact. Dust fell from the ceiling. The wounded men covered their heads. Some cried out. Others prayed. The barrage finally stopped. Harmon checked for damage. The cellar had held, but the building above took more hits. What was left of the church collapsed completely. Now they were buried under rubble. The only way out was a narrow passage to the west. If that passage collapsed, they would be trapped. Harmon tried not to think about that. He focused on the wounded. 3 new casualties arrived after the barrage, 2 Americans and 1 German. The Americans were from an artillery unit. Their position had been hit directly. Both had serious burns and shrapnel wounds. Harmon gave them morphine for the pain. He cleaned their wounds. He applied sulfur powder to prevent infection. Both would need blood eventually, but they were stable for now. The German casualty was a sergeant. He had been captured during a failed attack. A bullet had shattered his femur. The bone was broken in multiple places. Harmon splintered the leg, but without surgery and blood, infection would set in. The sergeant would lose the leg. Maybe his life. Harmon checked his watch. Hour 18. 6 hours since he had last slept. He was exhausted, but there was no time to rest. He went back to the German corporal. The man's pulse was weaker. He was running out of time. Harmon made his decision. He called Riley over. He told Riley to prepare a blood transfusion. Riley asked who was getting it. Harmon pointed to the German corporal. Riley hesitated. He said there were critical Americans waiting. Harmon said he knew. But this man would die in the next hour without blood. The critical Americans could wait a bit longer. Riley looked uncomfortable, but he followed orders. He set up the transfusion equipment. It was primitive. A glass bottle with a rubber tube, a needle to insert into the vein. Gravity pulled the blood into the patient's body. Harmon started the transfusion. The blood dripped slowly into the German corporal's arm. Within minutes, the man's color improved slightly. His pulse strengthened. The transfusion would take about 30 minutes for 1 pint. Harmon used 2 pints. That left 7 pints for the remaining wounded. 60 Americans and 14 Germans still needed treatment. The math was impossible. Harmon knew more casualties would arrive. The fighting continued outside. Every hour brought more wounded. The blood supply would run out. Then what? Then he would do what medics always did. Improvise. Save who he could with what he had. Private Kowalski saw the transfusion. He approached Harmon angrily. He asked why German blood was in an American bottle. Harmon said it was not German blood. It was typo blood, universal. It worked for anyone. Kowalski said that was not the point. The point was Americans were dying while Germans got treatment. Harmon said no Americans had died yet. Kowalski said yet was the problem. What if an American died later because the blood was gone? Harmon said he would deal with that, if it happened. Kowalski said Harmon was making a mistake. He said the other men agreed. Harmon said he did not care what the other men thought. He was doing his job. Kowalski walked away muttering. The transfusion finished. The German corporal opened his eyes. He looked at Harmon. He spoke in German. Harmon did not understand, but the tone was clear. The man was grateful. Harmon nodded. He moved on to the next patient, an American sergeant named Thomas Moore. Moore had a chest wound. A piece of shrapnel had punctured his lung. He was in respiratory distress. He needed blood and surgery. Harmon gave him 1 pint of blood. That helped stabilize him. But without surgery, Moore would not last long. The same was true for many of the wounded. They needed a hospital. They needed operating rooms. They needed surgeons. None of that was available in a surrounded town. Moore was 30 years old. He had been in the army since 1940. He had a wife and daughter back in Michigan. He showed Harmon their photograph. His wife's name was Margaret. His daughter Susan was 7. Moore said he had missed 2 birthdays already. He did not want to miss any more. Harmon promised to do everything he could. Near Moore lay Private First Class Robert Hayes. Hayes was 19 with shrapnel wounds in both legs. Harmon had tied off a severed artery. Hayes had lost significant blood. He needed a transfusion. Harmon gave him 1 pint. Hayes' color improved. He would survive. Hayes talked about his Iowa farm family. 5 brothers all serving in different theaters. His mother worried constantly. Hayes wrote her weekly, keeping his letters cheerful. He wanted her to think he was safe. Across the cellar, Corporal Jack Sullivan sat with a head wound. A bullet had grazed his skull but not penetrated. Sullivan was lucky. Harmon had bandaged the wound. Sullivan would recover fully. He was from Boston. A former police officer, Sullivan had witnessed the German medic's death. He told Harmon that medic was one of the bravest men he ever saw. Sullivan understood why Harmon gave blood to German prisoners. Medical care was about humanity, not sides. Among the German wounded, young Private Friedrich Koch lay quietly. Coke was 21 with an abdominal bullet wound. The risk of infection was high. Harmon had cleaned it and packed it with sulfur powder. Coke spoke no English, but his eyes communicated gratitude. Another German, Corporal Wilhelm Schroeder, had a shattered arm. Harmon had splintered it, but Schroeder would need surgery. He had been a carpenter before the war and worried about his future. Lieutenant Klaus Dietrich was the oldest German prisoner at 43. He had fought in World War I, and now this one. He told Harmon it was madness. His son died at Stalingrad. His nephew in North Africa. Dietrich had a minor shoulder wound but suffered from exhaustion and malnutrition. He said the German offensive was doomed. They lacked resources to sustain it. More men would die for nothing. At hour 19, the answer Harmon had been seeking became clear. He realized that the German medic's sacrifice 2 days ago had set an example. That medic had shown that medical ethics transcended national boundaries. He had treated an enemy soldier because it was the right thing to do. He had died for that principle. Now Harmon faced a similar choice. He could follow orders and let the German prisoners die, or he could honor the principle that medic had demonstrated. Treat the wounded regardless of nationality. The choice was obvious. The execution would be difficult, but Harmon knew what he had to do. He gathered the remaining 7 pints of blood. He assessed all the wounded again. He identified the 10 most critical cases. 6 Americans, 4 Germans. He would give blood to those 10, 1 pint each for the less critical, 2 pints for the most severe. That distribution would save the maximum number of lives. It also violated division orders, but it honored the Geneva Convention, and it honored the memory of the German medic who died saving an American paratrooper. Harmon believed that mattered more than orders. Orders changed, principles endured. Riley helped him prepare the transfusions. Riley did not argue anymore. He understood what Harmon was doing. He might not agree completely, but he respected the decision. They worked through the night, blood transfusion by blood transfusion. American, German. American, German. Harmon did not distinguish. He saw only wounded men who needed help. By dawn on December 23rd, all 10 critical patients had received blood. 7 survived. 3 died anyway. 2 Americans and 1 German. Their wounds were too severe. Blood alone could not save them. But Harmon had tried. That was all he could do. The word spread through the cellar. The Americans were split. Some, like Kowalski, were angry. They thought Harmon had betrayed them. Others understood. They had watched Harmon work all night. They saw he was trying to save everyone. A corporal named Jack Sullivan spoke up. He said Harmon had done the right thing. Sullivan was Catholic. He believed in mercy. He said Jesus taught that you helped everyone, even enemies. Kowalski argued back. He said this was war, not church. Different rules applied. The argument went on for an hour. Harmon ignored it. He was too tired to care about opinions. He had made his choice. He would live with the consequences. Captain Driscoll returned at dawn. He saw what Harmon had done. He pulled Harmon aside. He asked if Harmon understood the risk he had taken. Harmon said yes. Driscoll asked if Harmon would make the same choice again. Harmon said yes without hesitation. Driscoll sighed. He said he would document the decision in his report. He said he would recommend Harmon for a commendation. But he also said there would be an investigation. Division Command would want answers. Harmon said he would provide them. He was prepared to defend his actions. Driscoll said he hoped it would not come to a court-martial. Harmon said so did he. On December 23rd, the situation in Bastogne worsened. The German attacks intensified. More wounded poured into the aid station. Harmon had no blood left. He did what he could with bandages and morphine. The work was endless. The outcomes were often tragic, but Harmon kept going. Medics did not quit. He had been awake for over 30 hours. His hands shook, his vision blurred, but he kept working. The new casualties included men from various units. A lieutenant from the 327th arrived with burns. His jeep had hit a mine. A sergeant from artillery came in with severe leg wounds. Shrapnel had torn through his calf. Harmon worked without morphine. They had run out hours ago. The sergeant bit down on leather and endured. Among new German casualties was Corporal Hans Werner, shot near the spine. The bullet was too close to remove safely. Werner asked if he would be paralyzed. Harmon said honestly he did not know. Werner asked why Harmon was helping him. Harmon said because Werner needed help. Werner said Harmon was a good man. The tension in the cellar remained high. Some Americans resented the German presence. Lieutenant Dietrich spoke up in broken English. He said he understood their anger, but asked them to remember he was human too. Some were moved. Others were not. Corporal Riley worked tirelessly beside Harmon. Riley's faith sustained him. He prayed over the dying, German and American alike. That evening, Captain Driscoll brought news. Division Command was planning an airdrop, weather permitting. If the fog lifted, supplies would come. Harmon asked when. Driscoll said maybe tomorrow. That hope kept Harmon going. On December 24th, Christmas Eve, the weather cleared. The fog lifted. The sun appeared. Harmon heard airplane engines. Allied transport planes filled the sky. C-47s dropping supplies. Parachutes blossomed. The men cheered. The crates contained food, ammunition, and medical supplies, including 50 pints of blood. Harmon felt tears on his face. The supplies meant lives would be saved. Harmon and Riley organized the inventory frantically. They counted blood pints, sorted morphine, stacked bandages. Everything they needed was here. Hope spread through the cellar. Men who had been silent began talking. Harmon began distributing blood immediately. With adequate supplies, everyone who needed blood got blood. That was what medicine should be, helping everyone who needed help. The food supplies boosted morale. The men had been eating cold rations for days. Now they had hot soup, canned meat, chocolate. The simple act of eating lifted spirits. That evening someone started singing, Silent Night. Others joined in. Americans first, then Germans singing Stille Nacht. The melody was the same. The sentiment universal. Peace, hope, home. For a few minutes the war felt distant. Enemies singing together, finding common ground. A small miracle, but miracles mattered, especially in Bastogne. Harmon distributed the new blood quickly. He treated the remaining critical cases. Americans and Germans alike, with adequate supplies he no longer had to choose. Everyone got treatment. The tension in the cellar eased, even Kowalski softened. He approached Harmon later that day. He said he owed Harmon an apology. He said he had been wrong to criticize. Harmon asked why Kowalski changed his mind. Kowalski said he had been thinking about the German medic, the one who died saving the paratrooper. Kowalski said that medic had shown real courage. He had put saving a life above his own survival. Kowalski said Harmon had shown the same courage, by risking his career to save German prisoners. That was worth respecting. Harmon and Kowalski shook hands. The gesture meant more to Harmon than any commendation. Christmas Day passed quietly. The German attacks continued, but with less intensity. The German forces were running out of supplies too. Their offensive was losing momentum. Harmon heard rumors that General Patton's Third Army was fighting north from Luxembourg. They were trying to break the encirclement. It was just a matter of time. Bastogne would be relieved. The wounded would be evacuated. The siege would end. Harmon allowed himself to hope. On December 26th, the breakthrough came. American tanks from the 4th Armored Division reached Bastogne. The road was open. Ambulances began evacuating the wounded. Harmon helped load the first convoy. Americans and Germans were loaded into the same ambulances. They were all going to the same field hospital. The war was not over, but for these men, the battle was done. They would recover. They would go home. Some would carry physical scars. All would carry mental scars. But they would live. That was what mattered. Captain Driscoll called Harmon to his tent. He had news about the investigation. Division Command had reviewed the case. They had decided not to pursue charges. Driscoll's report had been favorable. He had explained the circumstances, limited supplies, overwhelming casualties. A medic making the best decisions he could. The German medic's sacrifice had also been noted. Division Command agreed that Harmon had acted within the spirit of the Geneva Convention. There would be no court-martial. In fact, Harmon was being recommended for the Silver Star, for courage under fire and exceptional medical service. Harmon did not know what to say. He had expected punishment. Instead, he was getting a medal. Driscoll said one more thing. The German Corporal Harmon had saved wanted to speak with him. The corporal was stable now. He was being held with other prisoners awaiting transport to a POW camp. Harmon went to see him. The corporal's name was Otto Becker. He was 26, same age as Harmon. Becker spoke some English. He thanked Harmon for saving his life. He said he did not expect an American to help him. Harmon said he was just doing his job. Becker said it was more than that. Harmon had risked his career, maybe his freedom, to save an enemy. That was extraordinary. Harmon mentioned the German medic who died. He said that medic had set the example. Becker knew about that incident. The medic was from Becker's unit. His name was Franz Müller. Müller had been a doctor before the war. He had volunteered as a combat medic. He believed in saving lives. Nationality did not matter to him. Müller had died as he lived, helping others. Becker said something that stayed with Harmon. He said the war made monsters of good men, but it also revealed heroes. Müller was a hero. So was Harmon. Not for killing enemies, but for saving them. That kind of heroism was rare. It took more courage to show mercy than to seek revenge. Becker said he would remember Harmon for the rest of his life. If he survived the war, if he returned to Germany, he would tell his children about the American medic who saved him. He would teach them that people were more than their nationalities. They were human beings, capable of cruelty, but also capable of kindness. Harmon shook Becker's hand. They parted as friends, or at least as two men who had shared a profound moment. Harmon remained in Europe for the rest of the war. He continued serving as a medic. He treated wounded in France, Luxembourg, and Germany. He saw more death than he could count. He saw more suffering than he could measure. But he also saw moments of humanity. Soldiers sharing food with starving civilians. Medics treating enemy wounded. Officers showing mercy to prisoners. Those moments did not erase the horrors, but they reminded Harmon why the fight mattered. They were fighting against an ideology that dehumanized people. By showing humanity to the enemy, they proved that ideology wrong. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. Harmon was in Bavaria when he heard the news. He felt relief and exhaustion. The war had consumed 3 years of his life. It had changed him. He was harder, more cynical, but also more compassionate. He had seen the worst of humanity, but he had also seen the best. He chose to focus on the best. That was how he would move forward. Harmon returned to the United States in June 1945. He was discharged with the rank of technical sergeant. He received the Silver Star at a ceremony in Washington, D.C. His parents attended. His father was proud. His mother cried. Harmon felt awkward. He did not feel like a hero. He felt like a survivor. He had done his job. Others deserved medals more. But he accepted the honor. He wore the medal for his parents, and for Franz Müller, the German medic who showed him what courage really meant. Harmon returned to Ohio. He enrolled in medical school at Case Western Reserve University. He graduated in 1949. He opened a general practice in a small town outside Cleveland. He treated everyone who came through his door. He never asked about ability to pay. He never asked about nationality, or race, or religion. He just treated them. That was his calling. His war experience had reinforced it. Everyone deserved care. Everyone deserved dignity. Those principles guided his entire career. In 1955, Harmon received a letter from Germany. The return address was Frankfurt. He opened it carefully. Inside was a photograph and a letter. The photograph showed a man standing with a woman and two children. The man was Otto Becker. The letter was in English. Becker had spent months composing it with a dictionary. He wanted Harmon to know what had happened after Bastogne. Becker had been sent to a POW camp in England. He had been treated well, better than he expected. After the war, he returned to Germany. He married his sweetheart. They had two children. Becker worked as a school teacher. He taught history and civics. He told his students about the war, about the cost of hatred, about the power of mercy. He told them about Franz Müller and Eugene Harmon, two medics from opposite sides who believed saving lives was more important than winning battles. The letter included details about Becker's journey. After Bastogne, he was evacuated to a field hospital. American surgeons removed the bullets. They repaired the damage. Becker spent 6 weeks recovering. Then he was transferred to the POW camp in England. The camp was near Liverpool. It held about 3,000 German prisoners. The conditions were basic but adequate. The prisoners slept in barracks. They received 3 meals a day. They had access to medical care. The British guards were firm but fair. There was no abuse or mistreatment. Becker said he felt fortunate. He had heard stories about Soviet camps. Prisoners there faced starvation and forced labor. Many died. Becker's British captivity was humane by comparison. During his time in the camp, Becker worked in the camp hospital as an orderly. He cleaned bedpans. He changed bandages. He assisted the doctors. The work was menial but meaningful. It connected him to medicine. It reminded him of Harmon and Müller. The British doctors noticed Becker's dedication. They taught him basic medical procedures, how to take vital signs, how to administer medications, how to recognize symptoms of common illnesses. Becker absorbed everything. He discovered he had an aptitude for medicine. When the war ended, the British offered him a choice: return to Germany immediately, or stay in England and work. Becker chose to return. His family was in Germany. His sweetheart Anna was waiting. Becker returned to Frankfurt in July 1946. The city was in ruins. Allied bombing had destroyed large sections. Buildings were collapsed. Streets were filled with rubble. The economy had collapsed. Food was scarce. Jobs were scarcer. Becker found his family living in a basement. His parents had survived. His sister had survived. But his brother had died on the Eastern Front. The news devastated Becker. He and his brother had been close. They had planned to open a business together after the war. Now that dream was gone. Becker grieved, but he also felt guilty. Why had he survived when his brother had not? That guilt would stay with him for years. Anna had waited for Becker. They had been engaged before the war. Anna had received no word from him for over a year. She had feared him dead. When Becker appeared at her door, she wept with joy. They married 6 weeks later. The wedding was simple. No fancy clothes or elaborate ceremony, just a brief service in a damaged church. A small reception with family, but it was enough. They were together. That was all that mattered. Anna worked as a seamstress. She repaired clothes for neighbors in exchange for food. Becker found work clearing rubble. The city needed to be rebuilt. It was hard labor, but it paid enough to survive. In 1947, Becker applied to university. He wanted to study education. His time in the British camp had shown him the power of teaching. The British guards had taught prisoners English. They had taught them about democracy. Some prisoners left the camp with new perspectives. They had learned that not all enemies were evil, that nations could disagree without dehumanizing each other. Becker wanted to be that kind of teacher. He wanted to help young Germans understand the mistakes of the past. He wanted to prevent those mistakes from recurring. The university accepted his application. Becker studied for 4 years while working part-time. It was exhausting, but he persevered. Anna supported him throughout. She believed in his mission. Becker graduated in 1951 with a degree in history education. He took a teaching position at a gymnasium in Frankfurt. His first class had 30 students, ages 14 to 16. They were curious about the war. They asked questions. Hard questions. Why did Germany start the war? What about the concentration camps? How could ordinary people participate in such evil? Becker did not shy away. He answered honestly. Germany had been led astray by a totalitarian ideology. That ideology appealed to people's fears and prejudices. It promised simple solutions to complex problems. It identified scapegoats. It dehumanized those scapegoats. Once dehumanization occurred, atrocities followed. The lesson was clear. Guard against dehumanization. Recognize the humanity in everyone, even enemies, even those you disagree with. Becker used his own story to illustrate this lesson. He told his students about Bastogne, about being wounded and captured, about expecting to die, about the American medic who gave him blood. Becker asked his students a question. Why would an American risk his career to save a German prisoner? The students offered various answers. Because the medic was a good person, because of his medical oath, because he believed in rules. Becker said all those answers were partially correct, but the deeper answer was simpler. The medic saw him as human, not as an enemy, not as a German, just as a wounded man who needed help. That recognition changed everything. Becker also told his students about Franz Müller, the German medic who died saving an American paratrooper. He described Müller's courage, crossing the battlefield under fire, dragging the wounded American to safety, getting killed in the process. Becker asked why Müller did it. The students struggled to answer. Müller and the American were enemies. Why help the enemy? Becker explained. Müller believed his duty as a medic superseded his duty as a soldier. Saving lives came first. Nationality came second. That was medical ethics. That was humanity. The students listened intently. Some were moved to tears. They understood the lesson. Individual choices mattered. You could choose mercy or cruelty. Becker's teaching approach was unconventional, but it was effective. Becker's first child, a son named Martin, was born in 1954. His second child, a daughter named Greta, was born in 1957. Becker was a devoted father. He read to his children. He played with them. He taught them values, kindness, honesty, courage. He told them about Müller and Harmon. He wanted them to understand that heroism came in many forms, not just soldiers charging into battle, but medics saving lives, teachers educating minds, parents raising good children, ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Martin and Greta absorbed these lessons. They grew up with a strong moral foundation. In the late 1950s, Becker became involved in Holocaust education. Germany was slowly confronting its past. The Nuremberg trials had exposed the horrors, but many Germans remained in denial. They claimed they did not know about the camps, or they minimized the atrocities. Becker decided to address this directly. He invited Holocaust survivors to speak to his students. The survivors' testimonies were devastating. They described the camps, the selections, the gas chambers, the mass graves. The students were shaken. Some could not believe such things had happened. Others wept. Becker told them this was their history. They could not change it, but they could learn from it. They could ensure it never happened again. Becker's work did not go unnoticed. Some parents complained. They said he was focusing too much on Germany's sins. He was making students feel guilty for things they did not do. Becker responded carefully. He said guilt was not the goal. Understanding was the goal. Students needed to know what had happened, and why, and how to prevent it. That required confronting uncomfortable truths. The school administration supported Becker. They recognized the value of his teaching. Germany needed educators willing to address the past honestly. Becker was one of those educators. In 1955, when Becker wrote to Harmon, he was reflecting on 10 years of post-war life. He had rebuilt his existence. He had a family, a career, a purpose. But he never forgot Bastogne. He never forgot the moment when he woke up in that cellar to see an American medic hanging a blood bottle above him. That moment had saved his life. It had also taught him a lesson. The enemy was human. If you remembered that, you could not hate blindly. You could not dehumanize. You had to see individuals. Becker tried to teach that lesson to his students. He tried to live it in his daily life. He tried to pass it to his children. That was how he honored Harmon's gift, by spreading the mercy he had received. Becker wrote that he thought about Harmon every December 22nd, the anniversary of the day Harmon saved his life. Becker said he owed everything to Harmon: his marriage, his children, his career, his life. He said he had tried to honor that gift by being a good man, a good husband, a good father, a good teacher. He had tried to spread the lesson Harmon taught him, that people were more important than politics, that mercy was stronger than hate, that one person could make a difference. Becker thanked Harmon again. He said he would be grateful until his last breath. Harmon read the letter 3 times. He looked at the photograph. Otto Becker looked happy. He had a family, a purpose, a life, all because Harmon had given him 2 pints of blood on a frozen December night in Bastogne. The choice Harmon made had rippled outward. 2 children existed who would not have existed otherwise. Students were being taught lessons they might not have learned. The ripple would continue. Those children would have children. Those students would teach others. The impact was incalculable. Harmon wrote back. He told Becker about his own life, his medical practice, his patients. He said he was trying to live up to Franz Muller's example, to show that medicine was about saving lives, not about politics or nationality, just lives. Harmon and Becker corresponded for decades. They became friends through letters. They never met in person. The ocean separated them, but the connection was real. They had shared something profound, a moment when one man chose mercy over orders, when one man chose humanity over hate. That moment defined both their lives. In 1969, Harmon read a newspaper article. It was about the trial of a Nazi war criminal. The man had been a camp guard at Auschwitz. He was being prosecuted for crimes against humanity. The trial was controversial. Some people thought it was too late. The war had been over for 24 years. Why dig up the past? Others thought justice had no statute of limitations. The man had participated in genocide. He needed to face consequences. Harmon understood both perspectives, but he leaned toward justice. The camp guard had made choices. He could have refused. He could have helped prisoners. Instead, he participated in their murder. That was different from being a soldier following orders in combat. This was systematic extermination. The article made Harmon think about choices. The camp guard chose cruelty. Franz Muller chose mercy. Harmon chose to honor Muller's example. Those choices defined who they were, not their nationality, not their uniform. Their choices. Harmon realized that was the lesson of Bastogne. In extreme circumstances, people revealed their true character. Some became monsters. Others became heroes. Most existed somewhere in between, trying to do right, sometimes succeeding, sometimes failing. Harmon fell into that middle category. He was not a saint, but he tried. That was all anyone could do. The trial forced Harmon to examine a difficult question. How did someone become capable of atrocity? The camp guard had been ordinary before the war. He had a family, a job, friends. Then he joined the SS. He worked at Auschwitz. He participated in genocide. What changed? Harmon thought about this constantly. He concluded that dehumanization was the key. Once you stopped seeing others as human, anything became possible. The Nazis had systematically dehumanized Jews, called them vermin, subhuman. Once that view took hold, murder became easy, even routine. The lesson was clear. Guard against dehumanization. Always see the humanity in others, even enemies. That recognition was the barrier between civilization and barbarism. Harmon had learned that in Bastogne, the German prisoners were human. They deserved treatment. That simple recognition had guided his choice. In 1974, Harmon received another letter from Germany, this time from Otto Becker's son. The son's name was Martin. He was 21. He was in medical school. He wrote to thank Harmon for saving his father's life. Martin said his father had told him the story many times, about the American medic who gave blood to a German prisoner, about the choice Harmon made when he did not have to. Martin said that story had inspired him to become a doctor. He wanted to save lives like Harmon and Franz Müller. He wanted to carry forward their legacy. Martin asked if he could visit Harmon someday. Harmon replied immediately. Yes, Martin was welcome any time. Martin visited in 1975. He stayed with Harmon for a week. They talked for hours. Martin was bright and curious. He asked about Harmon's war experiences. Harmon shared stories he had never told anyone, about the cold, the fear, the impossible decisions. Martin asked if Harmon ever regretted his choice to give blood to German prisoners. Harmon said no. He regretted the men he could not save, but he did not regret trying to save everyone. Martin asked if it was worth the risk, the potential court-martial, the anger of fellow soldiers. Harmon said yes, because the alternative was living with the knowledge that he let men die when he could have saved them. That would have been unbearable. Martin asked about Franz Müller. Harmon told him everything he knew. Martin said his father had told him similar stories. Müller had been beloved in his unit. He had treated everyone with kindness, German and enemy alike. Müller believed medicine was sacred. It transcended war. Martin said he wanted to be like Müller. Harmon said he did too. They agreed that was a worthy goal, to be doctors who saw patients, not nationalities, not enemies, just human beings who needed help. During that visit, Martin told Harmon about his journey toward medicine. As a child, Martin had been fascinated by his father's stories about the war, not the battles, but the moments of humanity. The German medic who died saving an American, the American medic who risked everything to save Germans. Those stories planted a seed. Martin wanted to help people the way Müller and Harmon had helped people. At age 15, Martin volunteered at a local hospital. He worked as an orderly. He cleaned rooms. He delivered meals. He observed doctors and nurses. He saw how medicine worked, the science, the compassion, the challenge. He was hooked. Martin excelled in school. He focused on biology and chemistry. His teachers encouraged him. They said he had the aptitude for medicine. He applied to medical school at Heidelberg University. The competition was fierce. Thousands of applicants for hundreds of spots. Martin's application essay made the difference. He wrote about his father's experience in Bastogne, about the American medic who gave blood when orders said not to, about the ripple effect of that choice. Martin existed because of that choice. His father had lived, had married, had children. Now Martin wanted to continue the legacy, to save lives the way Harmon and Müller had saved lives. The admissions committee was moved. They accepted Martin. Medical school was grueling. Long hours, intense studying, high pressure. Martin thrived. He loved the challenge. He loved learning how the body worked, how diseases developed, how treatments could heal. He specialized in emergency medicine. He wanted to work where quick decisions saved lives, just like combat medics. His professors praised his dedication. They said he had the temperament for emergency work, calm under pressure, quick thinking, compassionate but professional. During his training, Martin wrote to Harmon regularly. He shared his experiences. He asked for advice. Harmon responded with warmth. He told Martin to remember that patients were people, not cases, not diagnoses. People with families and fears. Treat the person, not just the disease. Martin took that lesson to heart. When he worked with patients, he made eye contact. He learned their names. He asked about their lives. That human connection made him a better doctor. Patients trusted him. They followed his recommendations. Martin graduated from medical school in 1979. He took a position at a hospital in Munich. The emergency department was chaotic. Ambulances arrived constantly. Heart attacks, car accidents, drug overdoses, industrial injuries. Every day brought new crises. Martin worked 12-hour shifts, sometimes longer. The work was exhausting, but also exhilarating. He was making a difference. He was saving lives, just like Harmon and Muller. One night, a patient came in who changed Martin's perspective. The man was a Turkish immigrant. He had been stabbed in a fight. The wound was serious. He needed surgery immediately. But the man spoke no German. He was terrified. The hospital staff struggled to communicate. Martin tried to calm him. He held the man's hand. He spoke slowly. He used gestures. The man's fear eased slightly. Martin thought about his father in Bastogne, wounded, surrounded by people who spoke a different language, afraid he would die far from home. Harmon had shown his father compassion despite the language barrier. Now Martin did the same for this Turkish man. The surgery was successful. The man survived. He thanked Martin in broken German. Martin understood. Gratitude transcended language. So did compassion. That experience reinforced Martin's philosophy. Medicine was about seeing the humanity in every patient, regardless of their background, their nationality, their language, their beliefs. They were all human beings who needed help. Martin tried to model that philosophy for his colleagues. Some embraced it. Others were more cynical. They said Martin was too idealistic, that he would burn out. Martin disagreed. Idealism sustained him. It gave his work meaning. Without it, medicine was just a job. With it, medicine was a calling. In 1982, Martin married a nurse named Helga. She shared his values. She believed in service, in compassion, in putting patients first. They met at the hospital. Helga worked in the intensive care unit. She was known for her gentleness with dying patients. She held their hands. She spoke softly to them. She made their final moments as peaceful as possible. Martin admired that quality. They dated for 2 years before getting engaged. Their wedding was simple but joyful. Family and friends gathered. Otto Becker gave a speech. He said Martin was carrying forward a legacy of mercy. That made him proud. Martin and Helga had 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. Martin told them the same stories his father had told him, about Bastogne, about Muller and Harmon, about the power of individual choices. The children listened wide-eyed. They asked if their grandfather was a hero. Martin said yes, but he also said the real heroes were the medics, the ones who chose mercy when hate would have been easier, the ones who saved lives when orders said to let them die. Those were the true heroes. The children absorbed those lessons. They grew up with a strong sense of service. All 3 eventually entered helping professions. One became a teacher. One became a social worker. One became a nurse. The legacy continued. In 1994, Martin attended the 50th anniversary reunion of Bastogne with his father. Otto Becker was 74 years old. His health was declining, but he insisted on making the trip. He wanted to stand where he had been wounded, where he had been saved. Martin supported his father as they walked the town. They visited the memorial. They saw the plaques with names of the fallen. Muller's name was there. So were many others. Otto wept. Martin held him. After a long moment, Otto spoke. He said he had carried guilt for 50 years. Guilt that he survived when so many died. Martin said survival was not a crime. Otto said he knew. But knowing did not erase the feeling. Martin understood. Survivor guilt was common. His father had lived with it for decades. At the reunion, Martin met other children of Bastogne veterans. Americans whose fathers had fought there, Germans whose fathers had fought or been captured there. They all shared similar stories, of parents marked by the experience, of nightmares that never fully went away, of a gratitude for life that was almost overwhelming. These were the children of a generation that had seen hell and survived. They carried that legacy forward. Some well, some struggling, all trying to honor the sacrifice. Martin also met veterans who remembered the aid station. One American veteran, Jack Sullivan, remembered Otto Becker. He said Becker had been one of the German prisoners who got blood. Sullivan had been there when Harmon made that choice. Sullivan said he had supported it then. He still supported it 50 years later. Harmon had done the right thing. Sullivan and Otto Becker shook hands. Two old men from opposite sides, united by a shared experience of humanity in the midst of war. Martin watched the exchange. He felt proud, proud of his father, proud of Harmon, proud to be part of this legacy. After Harmon died in 2001, Martin felt a profound loss. Harmon had been a mentor and friend. They had corresponded for 26 years. Martin had hundreds of letters from Harmon. He kept them all. He reread them sometimes. They contained wisdom about medicine and life, about staying true to your principles, about finding meaning in service, about the importance of compassion. Martin decided to compile the letters. He wanted to preserve them. He contacted Harmon's family. They agreed. Martin edited a collection called Letters to a Young Doctor, correspondence between Eugene Harmon and Martin Becker. The book was published in 2003. It became required reading in some medical ethics courses. The letters showed the long-term impact of one act of mercy, how it inspired a career, how it shaped a philosophy, how it created ripples that lasted generations. After Martin left, Harmon reflected on the visit. He realized that the ripple from his choice in Bastogne had reached a new generation. Martin was becoming a doctor because of what Harmon and Muller had done 30 years ago. That was the power of example. You did the right thing. You hoped it mattered. Sometimes you never knew. But in this case, Harmon knew. His choice had mattered. It had created a legacy, not in monuments or medals, but in the life of a young German man who wanted to save lives. That was enough. That was everything. Harmon continued practicing medicine until 1985. He was 67 years old. He had treated patients for 36 years. He had delivered hundreds of babies. He had set thousands of broken bones. He had diagnosed countless illnesses. He had saved lives he would never know about. That was the nature of medicine. You did your work. You hoped it helped. You moved on to the next patient. There was always a next patient. In retirement, Harmon volunteered at a free clinic. He treated uninsured patients. Many were immigrants. Some did not speak English. Harmon did not care. He treated them all. A nurse asked him once why he worked so hard in retirement. He could be relaxing, playing golf, traveling. Harmon said he did not know how to stop. Medicine was not a job for him. It was a calling. The nurse said she understood. She said the world needed more doctors like him. Harmon said the world needed more people like Franz Muller. The nurse asked who that was. Harmon told her the story. The German medic who died saving an American paratrooper. The nurse listened carefully. She said Muller sounded like a saint. Harmon said, maybe, but saints were just people who made the right choice when it mattered most. In 1994, Harmon attended the 50th anniversary reunion of the Battle of Bastogne. Veterans from all over the world gathered in Belgium. Americans, British, Germans. They walked the old battlefields. They visited the cemeteries. They remembered the fallen. The event was emotional. Old men with tears in their eyes, hugging each other, shaking hands, forgiving, moving on. Harmon found the spot where the aid station had been. The cellar was gone. A new building stood in its place, but the memory remained. He could still see the wounded men lying on the dirt floor. He could still hear their cries. He could still feel the weight of the decisions he made. A German veteran approached Harmon. He introduced himself. His name was Klaus Brenner. He had been a soldier in the German army at Bastogne. He had been captured on December 24th. He was treated at an American aid station. He said he wanted to thank the medics who saved him. Harmon asked which unit Brenner had been with. Brenner told him it was the same unit as Franz Müller. Harmon's heart jumped. He asked if Brenner knew Müller. Brenner said yes, Müller had been his friend. They had trained together. Müller was the best medic in the regiment, brave and compassionate. Brenner said he was there when Müller died. He saw him dragging the American paratrooper. He saw him get shot. Brenner cried as he told the story. He said Müller's death had haunted him for 50 years. Harmon told Brenner that Müller's sacrifice had inspired his own choices. Harmon had given blood to German prisoners because of Müller. He had risked his career because Müller showed him what real courage looked like. Brenner listened with tears streaming down his face. He said Müller would have been proud. Harmon said he hoped so. The two men embraced. They stood there for a long time, two old veterans from opposite sides, united by the memory of a man who believed saving lives was more important than winning wars. It was a fitting tribute to Müller, to all the medics who served, to the principle that humanity transcends conflict. Harmon died in 2001. He was 83 years old. His funeral was held in Ohio. Hundreds of people attended, former patients, fellow veterans, family, friends. Martin Becker came from Germany. He gave a eulogy. He said Harmon had saved his father's life, and in doing so had made his own life possible. Martin had become a successful physician. He had treated thousands of patients. He had trained dozens of medical students. He had passed on the lessons he learned from Harmon, that medicine was about service, that every patient deserved respect, that humanity was more important than politics. Martin said Harmon's legacy lived on in him, and in his students, and in the patients they treated. The ripple continued. After the funeral, Harmon's family donated his papers to the National World War II Museum. They included his medical logs, his letters from Otto Becker and Martin, his notes about Franz Müller. The museum staff was grateful. They said Harmon's story was important. It showed a side of war that often got overlooked. The medics who saved lives, the soldiers who showed mercy, the men who chose humanity over hate. Those stories needed to be told. They balanced the narrative. War was hell, but even in hell there were moments of grace. A historian named Dr. Sarah Williams researched Harmon's story. She wrote a book called The Medics of Bastogne. It was published in 2005. The book told the stories of medical personnel who served during the siege. Harmon's story was a central chapter. Williams interviewed Martin Becker. She interviewed veterans who had been in the aid station. She examined German records about Franz Müller. She pieced together a comprehensive account. The book won awards. It was assigned in medical ethics courses. It sparked discussions about triage, resources, and the duty of medical professionals during conflict. Williams wrote that Harmon's choice represented a fundamental tension in war: military necessity versus humanitarian obligation, saving your own versus saving everyone. There was no easy answer. Harmon chose humanitarian obligation. He believed the Geneva Convention and his medical oath superseded military orders. That choice had consequences. Some soldiers were angry. Some respected him. All remembered him. Williams argued that Harmon's choice was justified, not just morally, but practically. By showing mercy to German prisoners, Harmon demonstrated what America was fighting for: the principle that all lives had value, that even enemies deserved humane treatment. That civilization persisted even in the chaos of war. Other scholars debated Williams's conclusions. Some argued Harmon had risked American lives unnecessarily, that in war you prioritized your own forces. That was not cruelty. It was pragmatism. Limited resources demanded difficult choices. Harmon's idealism was admirable, but impractical. Others supported Harmon completely. They said military pragmatism was a slippery slope. If you could deny medical care to prisoners, what else could you justify? torture, execution. The Geneva Convention existed for a reason. It set boundaries. It preserved humanity in the midst of inhumanity. Harmon honored those boundaries. That was not just right, it was necessary. The debate continued for years. It showed that Harmon's choice still resonated. 70 years after Bastogne, people cared about the decisions made in that frozen cellar. They argued about ethics and duty and honor. That was healthy. It meant people were thinking seriously about war and morality. They were not accepting easy answers. They were wrestling with complexity. That was exactly what Harmon would have wanted. He did not want to be worshipped as a hero. He wanted people to think, to question, to struggle with the right thing to do. That struggle was where growth happened. The case study was adopted by numerous institutions beyond West Point. The Naval Academy at Annapolis used it. The Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs used it. NATO military schools across Europe used it. Each institution adapted it slightly to their context. But the core dilemma remained the same. Limited resources, conflicting duties, a choice that defined character. Students wrestled with the scenario. They debated passionately. They examined their own values. That examination was the goal, not to provide answers, but to develop the capacity for moral reasoning under pressure. One unexpected application came from corporate ethics programs. Business schools began using Harmon's case to teach resource allocation decisions. A CEO with limited capital, shareholders demanding returns, employees needing investment, customers requiring quality, stakeholders pulling in different directions. The parallels to Harmon's dilemma were clear. You could not satisfy everyone. Choices had to be made. Those choices revealed your priorities, your values, your character. Business students found the case compelling. It was not abstract theory. It was a real person making a real decision with real consequences. That made it powerful. Medical ethics courses expanded their use of the case. They paired it with modern dilemmas: organ transplant allocation, trade during mass casualty events, resource distribution during pandemics. The questions Harmon faced in 1944 remained relevant in the 21st century. How do you allocate scarce resources? Who gets treatment first? What principles guide those decisions? Medical students needed to grapple with these questions before facing them in practice. Harmon's case provided a framework. It showed that there were no perfect answers, only choices made with integrity. In 2014, the 75th anniversary of Harmon's choice, a documentary was made. It featured interviews with historians, veterans, and Martin Becker. The documentary explored the moral complexity of Harmon's decision. It presented multiple perspectives. It let viewers draw their own conclusions. The documentary aired on PBS. Millions watched. The response was overwhelming. Viewers debated on social media. Teachers used it in classrooms. Veterans shared their own stories of moral dilemmas in combat. The documentary succeeded in sparking conversation. That was its goal. Martin Becker appeared at several screenings. He was 70 years old. He had retired from medicine, but he continued to speak about his father's experience and about Harmon's choice. Martin said his family owed everything to Harmon. His father had lived 45 years after Bastogne. He had raised children. He had taught students. He had contributed to society. All because an American medic chose mercy. Martin said he tried to honor that gift every day by being a good doctor, by treating patients with respect, by teaching the next generation. That was how you repaid a debt like that. You passed it forward. The documentary also featured interviews with descendants of Franz Müller. Müller's grandson Stefan had become a paramedic. He worked for emergency services in Hamburg. Stefan said his grandfather's legacy inspired his career choice. Müller had died saving a life. Stefan wanted to live saving lives. He described the challenges of emergency medicine, the split-second decisions, the limited resources, the impossible choices. He said he thought about his grandfather often. What would Müller do in this situation? That question guided Stefan's decisions. He tried to see patients as human beings, not as statistics or cases. That perspective came from Muller's example. The documentary ended with a simple message. One choice, one moment, infinite impact. Eugene Harmon gave blood to enemy prisoners when orders said not to. That choice saved lives. It created families. It inspired future generations. It showed that humanity persists even in the darkest circumstances. That was Harmon's legacy. Not a medal or a monument, but the knowledge that he had acted with integrity when it mattered most. He had chosen mercy over hate, compassion over cruelty, life over death. That choice echoed across decades. It would continue to echo as long as people remembered, as long as people told the story, as long as people asked themselves what they would do in that frozen cellar with 9 pints of blood and 75 wounded men. The answer mattered. It always would. In the years following the documentary, a new generation discovered the story. Young people who had not lived through World War II, who had not known anyone who served, but who still grappled with questions of right and wrong, of duty and conscience, of when to follow orders and when to follow your heart. Harmon's story spoke to them. It showed that one person could make a difference, that moral courage was real, that integrity mattered. In an age of cynicism and moral relativism, Harmon's example offered something different, a clear choice made for clear reasons, not because it was easy, but because it was right. Schools around the world began teaching Harmon's story, not just military or medical schools, but high schools and middle schools too. Teachers used it to discuss ethics and decision-making. Students responded enthusiastically. They debated what they would have done. They examined their own values. They realized moral choices were not abstract. They were concrete. They happened in real moments. Those moments defined who you were. Harmon had faced such a moment in December 1944. He had chosen mercy. That choice rippled outward for decades, touching lives he would never meet, inspiring people he would never know anywhere. That was the power of one good choice, made at the right time, for the right reasons.